Ed, welcome back to the show. It's been a little while.
It has been a little while, man. A lot has changed, a lot has grown. We were just talking about the state of the world the last time I was on the show, and how it's different now, and hopefully we don't end up back there.
Yeah, certainly not. Yeah, 2020 was a life of restriction that none of us would ever want back.
Yeah, yeah. You don't. Freedom is one of those things you don't really appreciate until it is gone, in any form. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts or YouTube channels about prison lately. Not that I'm, because it was research for a fiction story I'm working on, and then I just got sucked in. And one thing that becomes very clear is like how much freedom makes a difference in everyone's daily life, and we don't appreciate it until it is gone.
Yeah, I certainly think so. And I think when some people have like the perspective of having it taken away from them, they should value something more. In the same way, there's the whole cheesy quote: the healthy man wants many things, the sick man only wants one thing, which is his health. And in the same way, when you're maybe restricted about the places you can go and when you can go, when you get that back, you quite quickly go back to a baseline of having all those other material desires and things that we want back.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things. In that same vein, kind of what you don't have versus what you do have. Like I often someone asked me the other day, or it was on like maybe another interview, and it was about how I'm or why I'm so grateful for everything in my life, and how I can always be resilient in the face of difficulty and setback. And one of the things that really immediately came to mind is I was like, well, I grew up pretty deprived, um, and and so I know how bad life can be, and so I keep a perspective on everything because I know what it's like to have nothing. I mean, like to have to go to the food bank to eat, to worrying if come home from school and there's an eviction notice on the door, and seeing whatever. I mean, I have no idea how my mom beat him, but we were never evicted, thank goodness. But seeing that's an anxiety and worrying about that, and then surviving on school lunches, and then over the summer, like summer lunch programs we'd have here and food banks. So I just know what it's like to have nothing, and I'm like, well, the difference now between then and now is like an able-bodied adult, so things will never get that bad. I'm an able-bodied adult with like skills. I've I won't say no pride, but certainly not so much pride that I would have let my family suffer if something happened. So I'll get out there. I got a car, man. I'll go Uber. I got a body. I'll go do construction. I'll do whatever. And I have like a degree, and I can write and stuff. So all of that to say, and I know it can never be so bad, but that's only because I've seen how bad it can be, and I will wonder how many people um, they don't have the same attitude because they're not aware that it's not it ain't gonna get that bad. Like, I mean, and if it does, as long as you're healthy and and not in prison, and even if you're in prison, I mean, like I don't know about prison, so let me not speak on that. As long as you're healthy, there's always a way out.
Perspective's everything, isn't it? And I think one of the quotes we've spoken about on a podcast previously was talking about comparison's the thief of joy. But when you can compare to your past and see how much of a difference your agency, your steps have taken to make the life that you live now for you and your family, that's really empowering. But it also gives you perspective that what maybe rock bottom or being close to rock bottom looks like and feels like, and you know how badly you would never want to go towards that too, can be a motivator.
Yeah, for sure. It's if you don't know. Okay, so if you don't know how bad a thing can be, you might let yourself get too close to it. And the part of that is learning. That's life. Like, okay, that stove is hot, don't touch it. But some stoves are really hot. Like, you're only going to touch it once, and it's not because you learned from it. It's because you didn't survive the mistake. So there's a there's a fine balance, but I think we don't get close enough to walking that balance. Most people don't, between you know, knowing how bad things can be, like just the general awareness of it, and perhaps that awareness, um, gaining that awareness through vicarious stories, or studying others, or reading about it. Because some rock bottoms, if you hit rock bottom too hard, you're gonna be broken, and you're not gonna be able to get back up. It might kill you. You don't want to
Of
get too
course.
close to things being too bad, but you do want to know how bad they can get, and then go, okay, we don't want to go down that route. We don't want to take that action. We want to keep making moves towards something better.
One of the quotes that I wrote down from the book links into what you're saying there, that you don't have to take the punches that I did, but you can learn from every one of them. And I think that's something that listeners to a podcast like this one over the last 5 years have taken a lot from the stories of guests to try and learn lessons that hopefully they don't have to learn from their own experience. They can perhaps learn vicariously, which is a pretty valuable thing to have.
Yeah. Because one of the things I always tell people is like, look, you don't want to learn everything the hard way, otherwise you might not survive to reap the benefit of the lesson. So you've got to be a student of life and people, and you have to be curious about people so you can learn their story, and you don't want to learn it to judge them, because that is also not useful, but it comes with a different type of problem. But you want to see that, you know you want to know how lucky you really are, and maybe luck is not the right word, because or fortunate. You want to know how fortunate you are, because there are any number of things beyond your control that can influence the outcome of your life. There's also a lot you can do, and you have to sometimes have this perspective that you manage to make it, you manage to survive, make good decisions. You weren't born with too much of a handicap that would be difficult, if not impossible, to overcome. And not just physical, though. That's certainly a thing. If you're born with a physical handicap, life is going to be difficult. But if you're born with a sociological handicap, I talk about this all the time with my upbringing, that one could it's dangerous to look at my life as kind of an example of
Mm.
what is possible, because survivor's bias is very real, in the sense that you look at the winners and go, oh well, obviously if this person went through that and they had a successful outcome, then perhaps we should emulate that process. And it's like, no, 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 no. You got to look at the people, the success ratio. Not most people don't make it, and so we have to go, all right, if they didn't make it, can we learn from what they didn't do? You almost have to ignore the winners. The winners make for great inspirational stories, but
Of
not
course.
instructional, because there are a lot of things that could have went wrong, and a lot of ways that even I got lucky, and I'm well aware of that.
Have you ever rubbed beef fat on your face? Sounds crazy, but that's what I've been doing since January with No Tox face balm. I've been really focused in the last few years on reducing the number of toxins that I take into my body, whether that's getting a filter for the water in my tap, whether that's removing things like heating plastics or drinking plastic bottles. The skin is the biggest organ in the body, so it was about time I considered what it was I was rubbing on my skin, and that includes things like moisturizers and other potentially harmful chemicals. Since January, I've been using No Tox face balm. My skin looks and feels the best it's ever felt, and you can benefit from that too. The link will be in the show notes for notoxskincare.co, and you can use Cambro for 15% off. By the very nature of somebody writing a book about their journey and their story, they are an outlier, because if it was a normal story, it wouldn't make for something that people would necessarily want to
What a great
read.
point. Like that's a great point. Like the mere fact that this is a story worth writing about. And look, I say that with all the humility and grace, but objectivism that I can kind of compress, because look, the book could be a flop and no one could care whatsoever. But I also know that there are smart people who looked at how I have built awareness of me, my story, and made a monetary bet. And they're not the best bettors, but they're not terrible. So I think it's a worthwhile story. But the only way the worthwhile story exists, right, is if there's a happy ending. And most stories don't have happy endings. I'm one guy. There would be if my story was normal, it wouldn't be a story, like you said. And so that tells us everything we need to know right there. The mere fact that I've written it. Forget that I'm even in a position to write it. That someone is like, this is a story worth telling, means that it's not common.
Absolutely. And I know your publisher actually said to you early on that rather than focusing purely on boxing, they wanted you to go more into your own story. Was that something you were surprised by?
I was, but just because, when you're in the forest, you don't realize how spectacular some of the trees are. That's just normal life to you. You grow up in the forest and you're used to seeing trees. But if you take somebody who's from the desert or from the tundra, they're gonna be like, wow, these are fascinating. And they're gonna be like, tell me more about these trees. Don't just tell me about that tree, or don't just tell me about that bug. I want to know the whole thing. And so with that analogy, it's my life. I've lived it. And to me, there are some things that are just not spectacular at all about it. But I'm fortunate that I have so we'll stop and just put a pause there, and we'll come back to it. You'll see why. I'm fortunate that I have dot dot dot. So the publishing industry, if you didn't know, is primarily driven by or dominated by pretty much white liberal upper middle to upper middle class women. Okay, so a guy like me is a bit of an outlier in general, not just from the writing perspective, but also in the people I'm dealing with. Like every meeting I get on, it's full of white women. And that's, I'm just saying that as a descriptor because it's important. I don't care what race anyone is. My wife is a white woman, right?
But you can speak about their politics and their pre-existing biases as well.
Well, yeah, and importantly, important to this though, the outlier for me is that my acquiring editor is a man and my agent is a man, and that creates this really interesting set of people to look at my work. And when I presented the proposal for the book to my agent, he was like, "This is not the book you should be writing. We need to see the story." And then when I put the first draft in, my acquiring editor was like really ecstatic about the first half that was telling my story, and then crickets, and then a bunch of replies, about the piece of work and all the stuff that I had glossed over. And I'm dealing with all these people in the meeting, the different parts of the publishing house. And I was like, this is what they got excited about compared to, what I had initially wrote. And so I went back and in the second draft nailed it probably faster than they thought because I had a really clear vision of what we're trying to do here. But I don't want to say I had a really clear vision. I just told the story. I told the story, what a great arc and follow through that made sense. Some side quests you got to leave out because while they're formative, they don't contribute to the narrative of the story,
the arc of the story, the hero's journey,
the arc of the story. Yeah. So writing the book, it wasn't just boxing, but I also did not believe. I thought everybody wanted to know more about the boxing, but I also didn't. But that's because I didn't believe, my story by itself was interesting. But as I did it really in the first draft, where I did a lot more research because I thought I was writing a different book, I was like, oh, there might be something here. My life is a bit more unique than I certainly would have given it credit for. And then thinking about what people pay me to come speak on and what people are really drawn to, uh, it's hard to ignore now, but that doesn't make it any less awkward. So I'm very aware of it. So back to what I was saying, really fortunate that I had the agent and the acquiring editor and the team around. The publishing house. We were talking about this before. The publishing does some things really well and some things really poorly. And we won't speak on the poor stuff because that's not really related. But the stuff they do well, especially in my instance, was they got me to see that how I grew up is and really, not just how I grew up, but the journey to how I got here. That is worth telling. People will eat that story up, and it's great.
100%. And I interviewed our mutual friend Rob Henderson twice in the show, and he had a very therapeutic experience writing Troubled. And I know he's read your book and he's a big fan of your book as well. And Rob, again, he knew his story was unique because he'd been asked about it on podcasts before, in the same way as you. People ask about your upbringing in the projects, and they want to know about your physics degree and your boxing career and overcoming alcohol addiction, all these things and these facets that we spoke about 5 years ago. But you sometimes don't realize quite how unique some of those stories are, and how much somebody can take from, oh my goodness, Ed went through that and this is what shaped him to be the man that he is, or it shaped him to understand this particular lesson that I can learn from him. That's where the value comes from. And away from the podcast for the last 18 months now, I've been doing a lot of sales coaching. And one of the concepts I teach a lot of the guys is that facts tell, stories sell. And having a story behind a product or a client testimonial or a journey they went on, it makes the lesson or the feature, the benefit you're reinforcing so much clearer. In the same way, if you're going to teach us today about environment design or the value of relationships, it's all wrapped up within a story that helps us to envisage why it matters and what we should take from it.
Yeah. And look, you know what else that reminds me of too? There's the rapper Logic, the white guy. He's got this song 44 bars, and in that song he's got this line. I mean, it's a great song in general. But that line, he says, this look is weak and crazy. Or rather, this week is looking crazy due to high demand, because people in this day and age don't buy music, they buy the brand. And that always stuck with me. And then as I started just looking and going through this process, I was like, this is something, because there's, back to what I was saying earlier about anybody can write a book. That is so easy that you literally pay somebody to do it. That's what ghostwriters do. What a ghostwriter can't do, or what no one else can do, that only you can do, is what is the brand? What is the story behind the story? Who's the person behind all this? That is the magic, man. At least I'm hoping it's the magic, right? But I have a good feeling it's the magic. It's me. It's my story. And it's how I show up day to day on the internet. Not just on the internet, but we'll say, to combine internet and in person, how I show up to the audience, and all that combines to create this fascinating brand that is inseparable from me. But I think that's everyone. The only difference between brand and reputation is we think of brand in the sense of something we're trying to sell, and reputation typically does not have marketing connotations to it, unless you're speaking negative, like that company has a bad reputation maybe. But they're one and the same. And you can't escape either one.
Absolutely. One of the first lessons I wanted to ask you about was, why does a hard childhood make it easier to accept harsh truths?
Well, yeah, I think that's the first chapter. Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you grow up without the ability to live in your imagination, and you get confronted with a lot of the harshness of the world early. Like I said earlier, typically that has not typically, it always has a lasting effect, a damaging effect. But one of the I'll put this in air quotes, positives about it is that you don't come in with believing in the inherent goodness of people, or like that the world is going to come save you. There's that popular self-help trope, nobody's coming to save you, and it's true. The difference is when you grow up in an abusive, violent environment, you you've internalized that pretty early. So for me, it being an adult, and being a child, I mean, I have a very clear memory in my life where I was like, I am more mature than my mother, who was the one raising me, and I'm gonna be able to make better decisions. So I got to make sure I make the best decision I possibly can at each turn. Um, but all of that comes from seeing and experiencing a lot of terrible things growing up. So I don't have any, or I did not harbor any illusion about the world or my place in it or what I had to do. And I think a lot of people, they get to exist and look, I'm not saying this is bad. I think that's what kids should do. I mean, I'm gonna do the same for my son to a degree. Make sure that he gets to be a kid pretty much.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a point where we have to grow and become adults. If that comes too early, there's a lot of damage that can be done.
It's that
But
reality coming home really, really early. It's like you say, it doesn't allow you to live in your imagination. It doesn't allow you to have childlike, carefree experiences that you would hope that your family would have.
yeah, you really don't. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like you can't have fun. There's certainly like moments that are fun and enjoyable and carefree, but it's like there's always this anxiety. When I think about my childhood a lot, anxiety comes to mind, and I didn't have the
Mm.
word for it when I was a kid. And I don't think I'm an anxious person now for whatever reason. Maybe it's some type of maybe part of it's, I'm sure, genetic, but part of it is also just learning to deal with that environment and exist in it without losing my mind. But
Exposure therapy is massive, Ed. So we
yeah,
become accustomed to things, don't we? Like, for
yeah, well,
example, my first public speaking talk on sales and communication, I was more nervous than the second and third because I turned up to the next ones and my anxiety, my heightened experiences were like kind of emotions were way down because I knew what was going to happen next in the same
right. You
way.
you knew what was going to happen next. That's key. When you don't know what's going to happen next, which is a hallmark of that type of environment. Like you don't know what's going to happen next. You just know it's probably not going to be good. So you
Mm.
become, the term is hyper vigilant. You're always on edge because you can't really ever relax, and that can produce really a lot of downstream effects. I have a video about this, about the downsides of being street smart. Well, the only way you become street smart is by being street dumb and paying the price for that. But from like a neurological perspective, when your amygdala, your fight or flight fear organ, to simplify it, is always under fire. That thing is it it doesn't just calmly tamp down. Everything is something to worry about. Everything is something to worry about. So for me, maybe it's because maybe there is a component where I'm naturally calmer, because a lot of people who grow up in my environment, they don't have this calm, this impulse control that I think I have. And even my impulse control is not like I had to work at it. I had to work at it. But I'm in a position where I can work at it. A lot of guys end up behind bars. Um, but but yeah, that whole environment makes it easy to look at the bad, and I think that's what it really boils down to. Because you pay a bigger price for a false negative than you do a false positive, or to put it differently, you pay a much bigger price for assuming someone is going to be nice and kind and treat you well, um, and they don't, than you do assuming they're bad and they turn out to be good. So the first one being a false negative. You don't think anything is wrong with them or that they're going to treat you a certain way, and they do, versus a false positive. You think they are exactly what you've experienced, and it turns out they're not. A lot of people struggle with the first. That's where trust issues come from, in a sense. I thought this person was good, they weren't, and they screwed me over. But when you grow up without any solid people to trust, or in a safe environment, you just assume everything, and that keeps your head on a. For me, I always said it was like a low level, swivel. So but that makes it very easy to accept that the world is the people are going to be people. We're just apes in suits, as they say, right? When you've seen the animalistic nature in an environment with scarce resources, and when you've seen that's how I would, if I had to come up with a meta term for the ghetto: scarce resources everywhere, whether that be love, whether that be money, doesn't matter, scarce. So you learn to deal with that, learn to adapt.
When it comes to that early exposure to pain and instability, how do you think that shapes emotional resilience?
The way I describe it is like lifting weights. If you lift a weight that's too heavy, if you lift the weight that's too light, let's start there with the more positive one. If you lift the weight that's too light, you don't get stronger. That's like a participation trophy kind of deal. You never get to deal with the disappointment of losing or being told you're not good enough. And so you end up, as an adult, not strong enough to deal with the resilience of the real world. The idea is that as you get older, the appropriate weights for the appropriate level, and you get stronger, you're able to handle increasing levels of we'll call it personal pain. Okay. And deal with it accordingly. One of the things I've always said to people is like, look, if you're going to get your heart broken, you can get your heart broken when you're like a teenager or a young adult, where you can learn to deal with it, and you don't have to deal with the other stressors of life and be all knocked around. Okay. Much more catastrophic, I would imagine, if the first time you get your heart broken is like your first relationship at 30 and you're all shaken up. That's an example. But the other end of that, if you try to lift a weight that's too heavy, and it's like your first time lifting weights, so you try to go deadlift way beyond your capacity, and anybody ever taught you how to deadlift, spotters around, the weight's too heavy, you're gonna hurt yourself. Not only will you hurt yourself, you're not going to be able to get back into the weight room for some time, if ever again. Or you try and squat like 625 and you ain't never squatted. Not only can you be injured, man, you can be traumatized by picking them weights up again. You probably didn't want to go near weight. That's what early exposure is like to some really traumatic situations for kids. It messes them up. If you they got this test called the ACE test, adverse childhood experiences. I took that test. So let me tell what the test is for listeners who don't know. The test looks at its 10 adverse childhood experiences. And they've linked whether you've experienced them or not. And it's everything from have you ever been abused physically, emotionally, or sexually?
Have you witnessed domestic violence?
Witnessed domestic violence. I think drug and alcohol is
That's right.
Drugs and alcohol is in there, right? So and then they've linked the outcome of these results to adult outcomes. Chance of being in prison, suffering of mental abuse, mental. Wow, how can I say this? Mental disorders. There we go.
Yep.
Mental disorders, addiction, things like that.
There's a big link to obesity as well, Ed.
Score
is a huge indicator of obesity.
Very much so. Okay. So I took this test. I scored like a 6 or 7. I was like, holy shit, man. But that's why we don't look at the survivors, harkening back to that, because I had my issues too. I mean, I struggled with alcohol. Definitely was very poor most of my adult life. But that's another outcome, poverty, by the grace of God, I have not ended up in prison. That's mostly luck, though. Definitely, they've been well within their rights a few times to book me. I'm not talking about getting away with stuff, but I mean, like, the cops were there. But I say all that to say that when you go through that stuff too early, like your brain ain't ready, man. It's not ready, and you develop you develop a really bad outcome of life. Like if you're if you're like, I'm trying to just think, your 5 or 6, and you witness the people, your only exposure to adults interacting is them beating on each other or yelling at each other, or you see your parents always drinking and smoking and hit you, or somebody touches you funny. Can you imagine? Like you don't even have the comprehension for that, but you just know it's messed up. And then as you get older, it 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 affects as you go through puberty and your brain starts to change. You're like, why am I angry? And there's no support for you on top of that, because on top of that, and for those things to happen, a lot of times there's not even a supported system around, because the support system around would kind of protect you anyway from a lot of that damage. Like a loving household that listens to you likely is not going to have parents that are doing any of that stuff. So you got to figure out how to navigate the world, which is what we're supposed to do with our children, teach them how to navigate the world. But not only have we not taught them that, we've given them a disadvantage. We've set them up for failure. And it's heartbreaking when I think about it, and I look at some of the stories in my family, just haven't seen it, and I look at my story as well. Um, I know that early exposure, especially like no, you want some stress, and I think Dr. Peter Attia said it great. He's like there's two kinds of trauma. There's the trauma with the little t, and you need that kind of trauma, because that's like like you lose a game, or you get into an argument, or you get your heart broken, or you skin your knee, stuff like that. Or you and your parents have a disagreement, and maybe they yell at you, but you're like 12, not 5. uh and you things like that. Okay, that's a little trauma. It breaks you, but it's an appropriate level of breaking. It's like lifting in an appropriate weight. And then
Progressive
there's the
overload.
big, yeah, progressive overload, just applied to your mentality or your emotions or your psychology. And then there's the big T. That's the shit that messes you up, man. That's you know being sexually assaulted when you're like 10 by an adult you were supposed to trust. That's that's witnessing your mother get arrested, or get beat up, or be drunk. That's what that is. That's dealing with physical abuse from, again, the people that you're supposed to love and trust. That's the big T. That stuff ruins kids.
What
It makes
stops
sure.
you being a victim of your environment, Ed?
Um, I got so we'll talk about the luck factor again. Um, for whatever reason, I'm naturally a little calmer, and that helped me. You get when you're smart. I think I'm a little, as they measure intelligence, and all intelligence is pattern recognition. Now, you might not figure out the best way to manipulate that pattern or to avoid the bad parts of it, but you do okay. Um, like dealing with my mom a lot. I figured out that kind of the best way to play a game, or the best way to win the game, is to not play. I I was also fortunate that I got to go to this school one day a week across, with a different set of people, and I got to see that it didn't have to be this way. And I also, for whatever reason, wasn't very social when I was younger, um, so I didn't make friends, and that's a good thing in retrospect.
Because the friends
Um,
that you would have made would have been a problem.
they would have all been from my neighborhood or surroundings, so I didn't deal with any of that. And then my high school years, I went to a completely different high school, way outside of my neighborhood. It was an hour bus ride each way, so 2 hours commuting each day, and made a tremendous difference because I got to see and meet and be around people. I was old enough to just not go home or to play a sport or to get
Or
a
wrestling, I
job.
know that was a big part of things.
I didn't wrestle when I was in high school. I played football, I
Oh,
ran
football.
track, and I swam. Those were the sports I played, and it wasn't that I had a job. I spent so little time at home in
Mm.
high school, and not only that I not at home, I was around really good people, like really good adults who understood like I think my life, and because I wasn't like some asshole, they didn't mind having their kids around me, and I benefited from those relationships, positive peer pressure. I also had a little bit of agency, or a lot of agency, I guess, because I chose to go to that school. I chose to go out for these teams. I chose to get jobs, and I didn't realize it at the time. I just knew I didn't want to go home. I didn't. Um, but all of that little stuff that kept me. Not only did it keep me from being around a lot when I was old enough to really get in trouble, but it also just gave me different influences and a different way to see the world.
That's right. And one of the concepts you wrote about the book is within the book is a Stoic philosophy that called dichotomy of control. So almost like distinguishing between what you can and can't control. And I think that's something you clearly had at a young age, where I can't control that when I go home to the projects that my mum's in a violent relationship and there's drug abuse. But what I can control is that I go to these sports, I spend time with these individuals that are perhaps in a different path. I'm around adults that are encouraging me with my studies or encouraging me with my sporting pursuits, that it means that I'm not in the environment as often as I could be or should be.
Yeah, and that's a real look. Again, I don't know why I realized that or how I realized it, but I know I realized it at an early age that there are some things I can control and there are other things I can't. Let me work on what I can control. Um, and it's probably because you realize you can't control what kids are gonna say or do. I got picked on a lot when I was a kid, and I just said, all right, I'm not gonna let this bother me because otherwise I'll be fighting every day. Who knows? Um, and so I didn't. I went and just focused on what I could worry about, which was me. And that attitude helped me to make decisions to get me out of that environment.
It's like you're unconsciously competent at that stage. You've made a really competent choice, but you weren't conscious of why you did it.
No idea why I did it. Other than, well, I mean, I know why I did it because I did. I was tired. Tired of fighting and being under stress and I wanted to just be around people I liked where it was more like me. I mean, look, I spent a lot of time reading books and playing video games when I was under the eighth grade, we'll say, or younger than the eighth grade, before I got to high school, or the eighth grade and before. High school was ninth grade and up. I mean, I played some video games in high school, but not the way I played in middle school because I was just I needed something to do, right? Um, and that made me. I didn't realize until I got to high school, man. But that made me a nerd, man. That I had gotten the anime and gotten the video games. I didn't know that. It was my thing.
It kept you away from trouble though, which is probably one of the key differentiators. Like you say, by you not having friends in the ghetto meant that you wouldn't probably be running around with a gang.
Yeah, I mean, not even like a gang. I mean, look, when I was doing research for my book, I just got to thinking about people that I grew up with around the neighborhood, and you can just look their name up and see if there's any news, and you can also look up on the what is it called? You can see if they've done any crimes. Like you can see the
Mm.
crimes in the state. And there were a lot of people that like I like knew like had played video games with, I spent time around that were in all types of like legal trouble. But there were some success stories too. I mean, you just not many, but you get to see that and you realize like all it would have taken was me being me falling in with that crowd, and maybe it makes sense for me to do it. I don't know. I'll never know. Thank goodness. but it, I think people vastly underestimate the power of the people you spend time around. Nature's funny, actually. I think the two things that really make a huge difference um, in your success. And look, I'll be the first person to tell you, you make your own decisions, you work hard, you make the life you want to make. I'll be the first person to say that because that's true. And even if it's not true, I mean, unless it's like we're living in a blatantly communist state, it's mostly true. It's directionally accurate, as I like to say. But on the other end, I'm old enough now to have seen the effects of people born when I was like 15, 18. They're adults now, my family, and see where they are. And then also to look at the research. You know, the two things that make the biggest difference in your outcome in life, the zip code you grow up in, and your family, the family you're born to. And you have no control over either of those things. It's nature's funny that way. It's almost like your life, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but once you have a child, it doesn't, because all you're trying to do is ensure that the next generation, if you're supposed to care, has is set up for success. You know, like they've looked at. I've written about, well, not written about it, because this was part of the research I did for kind of the first draft of the book when I thought I was writing one kind of book, and the reality is I was writing a memoir. And the great part about a memoir is you don't need to do too much research. It's your life.
It's your story.
You don't realize that though, until after you write the first draft and you're like, oh, I'm not supposed to have written this story. But I ended up learning so much and understanding so much. They've tracked the income of people and their children, and how poor you were growing up is so strongly related to how much money you'll make as an adult, at least at the age of 30. It's like it's just a tight correlation. But you want to know what like eliminates that? What we'll call it like the poverty curse. You grow up in poverty. If you grow up in a two-parent household, that mobility is like that disadvantage. It just vanishes, and you become upwardly mobile again.
It's
And
the
that
same for
tells us
graduating university as well. It makes a massive
yep.
difference. If you come from a two-parent household, it's one of the biggest predictors of graduating from university.
And it's crazy. And you know what that tells us? Because the way I discovered this is there's this study that they were talking about the difference between rural poverty and urban poverty. And it turns out that rural poverty is like completely different than urban poverty in terms of how the children are raised. And the biggest difference is that rural poverty, just because it's a smaller economy and it tends to be more focused around work, but one of the big things is that people in rural poverty tend to have both parents around.
It's a nuclear family. They're more traditional as well.
Yeah. And so that effect, it vanishes entirely. It's almost like money doesn't matter. Work ethic, or rather, it's like money doesn't matter bringing up a child. It's like what you teach them and what you model for them. And then to not a lesser, when I say lesser, I mean not as important, but still very important, where they live, because that determines their environment, the friends they'll make, all of that. You can't pick your children's friends at all, but you can reduce the selection process, or rather the selection pool for them. I can't tell my son who to hang out when he gets older, but I can make sure we're not going to a school or live in an area where his selection is mostly kids who are going to get into trouble. And that look, that's a harsh thing for people to hear, but the biggest gift you get to give your kids is staying together, like, or rather picking the proper person to have children with, because that's really where it starts. And then where you decide to live. I read this great essay when I was doing research. Zip code is not destiny, but it's as strong as gravity. And it was written by a teacher in Atlanta. And he was talking about the differences in one zip code over with the students and the outcome and how the parents interact with the school. It's huge difference. You can't, I didn't realize, for example, growing up, we had parent teacher conferences. My mom went to with the ones she could, but sometimes she had to work. It's not that my mom didn't care. It was like, sometimes you got to work. Sometimes you can't make them. Compare that to growing up in a school district, and that was not just my situation, right? Because I went to schools where most of the kids were like single moms. Compare that to a situation where both parents are there, so one of them can always make it. There's some involvement. If for no other reason, there's a higher tax bracket, and people are like, "Where's my money going? What are we doing here?" And that's really the advantage of private schools. People don't understand this. At least a lot of people don't understand it. I think because I had this discussion on Facebook, a guy thought that private school teachers are paid more. Like, no, sir, they are paid less. At least here in the United States. But what comes with that is that they are less restricted in kind of the criteria for hiring, and it's a very direct. If you get these kids to perform, your job security is higher. I mean, rather, let me change the perspective on this. The reason why kids are sent to a private school, one of the reasons, aside from like the prestige and the idea that you're paying for an education, well, because you're paying now, it's a lot closer to a market force. If the teachers are if the parents don't like a teacher, the teacher's out.
That's right.
Compared to a public school where it's very hard to get fired as a teacher. Very hard. Just hard. No matter how poorly you perform, and no matter how many complaints you get, to a certain, of a certain degree, you can't be in there like, trying to hook up with your students. But if you like, you got kids failing, not doing well, they're gonna ice you. They're not gonna ice you. Compare that to a private school. It's a very different environment.
Yeah, it's more cutthroat.
But that's kind of all of that to say, it really matters the family you're born into and where that family is. Huge determiner of your future success. And nature said, but you're not going to have any control over that.
If you're new to the podcast, make sure you've hit the subscribe or the follow button on whatever platform you're listening on so I can keep getting fantastic guests just like this one. One of your recent YouTube videos was really critical of the red pill space online. Why was that?
But because I have come to see, after spending a lot of time in that space, I'm not some random outsider commenting on this. I've spoken at the conventions and met a lot of the people, and there are good people behind it. The problem with the movement, though, is if you look at everything as a problem, then you're going to see problems. If you're an older guy, I can't say nothing to you. That's your game. That you didn't done it, especially if you already had kids. I mean, hey, where my concern is being a young man is already. It ain't never been easy for a guy. Let's get that out the way. Guys are talking about, oh man, all these women are so selective and picky today and can't find anything. Like, bro, if you look at the DNA records, we know that roughly one man reproduced for every 16 or 17 women, roughly in that space. So it's never been easier. Okay. So if you come in and you start complaining about today this way, knowing how it's been before, what you're doing to the younger generation is you're making them not interested. Not only are you making them not interested in something that's vital, but if we stop, getting together, we're going to have fewer babies, and civilization is, I don't know. It's not to mention that's half the population. You got to figure out some way to work together. And look, I'm not, I got my beef with the feminism movement, which I consider at least this version of feminism today. Not the one that was like getting women the right to vote and like get a credit card without their husband's signature. I ain't talking about that feminism. That stuff was necessary and possible. I'm talking
that was foundational. Today. What we have now is more of a Marxist framework.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So my beef with a red pill, where I can speak from, what I can talk about, is that if you tell these younger guys, you put these ideas in their head. When bad things happen, you look for a way to explain them so you can ideally figure out a pattern and avoid the problem next time. But the problem with the red pill approach is that the money involved. A lot of guys make money, whether that's through selling product or that's through ad revenue on YouTube for their hot takes. There's money involved, and to become a leader in this space, you have to. It tends to directly relate, and that's all spaces directly relate with your ability to earn. If for no other reason, you have a larger audience to sell to or view your videos. And that becomes a self-reinforcing loop. Now we got to keep spitting this out there. Whether they believe it or not, I'm not going to get into that. But what I will testify to is that the attacks have to become more extreme and more vitriolic to hold people's attention. Because ain't nobody trying to hear, okay, it's your fault, dudes. Let's go work on this, this, and this. And maybe you want to stop looking for in the club or on dating apps. Ain't nobody trying to hear self-accountability. Instead, they want to talk about how all women are got an OnlyFans and they only are interested in the chat. Never mind, and if you ain't 6 feet tall, you're cooked. I had guys messaging me saying like, "Man, I'm 5'6", and I ain't never had any, no women want to talk to me because I'm short." And I'm like, man, I'm like that just isn't reality. I know tons of guys who I know them. But you got to get out and touch grass and see reality and go take the risk and learn things. Yes, being shorter is a handicap, but it's not the end of the world.
It's not fatal. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And so my problem, with all that said, if I could, I guess, sum it up without diving into the details, is that it presents the world worse than it really is for a demographic that is likely to take that interpretation when it's already at a hard point for them. Okay. I'm not even saying, and I said this in the video, I'm not even saying some of the points aren't accurate. But you know what it's like? Like if you look at the numbers of violent crime in the United States, you might come to the conclusion that all black people are violent. Because it's going to be broken down by race. Meanwhile, if we broke it down by income, we'd see that it's really poor people that are doing a lot of the crazy shit. Not a lot of them happen to be black for different reasons. We're breaking down by income, but because of the way our brains work in a very simplistic manner when we're looking to create and explain the world around us, you're going to fixate on the black thing. You can see that. It's very easy, right? And that's how racists are born. Or extreme racist content that propagates, and then on top of that, then your experiences start to reflect that because you go, black dude robbed me, saw black dude shoot, it must be black people. Never mind, because we don't know how much he made or where he's from, and when we break it down that way, it starts to look a little less racial, more income driven,
class and society based. Yeah.
Yes, I always say that racism is classism is disguised as racism. That's what I always say.
Yeah, Rob said the exact same on the pod because he was laughing about, he was like, we need to stop talking just about white privilege because it's not necessarily white privilege, it's income privilege.
Yeah.
And people from the left really hate that because they love banging the drum for like all white people are racist and they have privilege. In the same way, people on the other side of the debate are like, oh, all black people commit crime, and it's just a ridiculous worldview that they have, and that's just how they view things, and they want to like beat that particular drum or ideology.
It's so simple. Meanwhile, if we go, it's not. In fact, there's a whole thing called not all women are like that. No water or something like that. I think it is. It's the whole thing. It's like no, not. But I genuinely believe that, and the only way you can believe that is if you have enough experience. Now, yes, women think a certain way, just like men do, but there's not all men are like that. It's all women because that's the focus. Meanwhile, though, if your dating advice or your advice on how to approach women is coming from somebody who ended up going through like a bunch of divorces or heartbreaks or got cheated on, well, you're gonna look around and go, well, a lot of these people who are co-signing it, who clearly have resonate with it. Instead of stopping to ask, why do these guys resonate with this? It's like the negative side of things. We hear the negative parts so much more loudly. There are tons of, not tons, but satisfied people don't tend to make noise. It's like reviews. It's like whenever you see a negative review, you're going to see that because that person was so dissatisfied they took the time to write a review. Okay.
Yep.
If your life is so messed up or you had such a bad experience that you took the time to become a red pill influencer, yes, you're going to bring out people from the woodwork who also think that way. But what you're doing is also presenting this image that it is, because your voice will be the loudest, it will be the most magnified, it will be the one that people argue against. You are showing, and some of your points might, I won't say might hold some water, but from the simplistic view, woman in 20s, or this girl in 20s doesn't want to date me. She goes out with these guys who look better or are taller. Therefore, all women like height. I have no chance of getting better. Or this woman decided to cheat on me. Never mind looking at like her background or who she's from, or like, look, my babysitter is 22 and is getting married. So don't tell me that, like, you know. And it's been with this girl I tutored, been with the same guy since she was like a freshman in high school. And she's just, a cute girl. If she wanted to, she could leave him. But like, no, like you get enough experience and you realize that there's a lot, that the onus of responsibility falls on the guy. So when you start taking your advice from guys who have in general shirked a lot of the responsibility, that's why one of the things I say is, like, you got to vet the guys you listen to who are putting it out there and go, look, okay, what have they done? How are they selecting? You might see it really isn't like that. I'm not saying that, look, I think I said it in the video that, like, and because I was comparing it to the street smarts thing. If you get used to, if you spend all your time, and I had the same issue, you spend all your time dealing with women on dating apps, women in clubs. I don't know if people go to clubs anymore. You're going to start dealing with, like you're dealing with the same demographic. So of course some commonalities
with the same problems, the same behaviors, and they become a self-fulfilling prophecy from what you're seeing from the likes of a Fresh and Fit shouting about.
All your only tools and hammers, or everything is a nail. It might be a tall nail, it might be a short nail, it might be a crooked nail, but all you know is a nail. And you come up against a lug, you don't even know what lug nuts look like, let alone have the tool to deal with it. And so you're telling every guy you got to be a hammer. Because all I know are nails. So, and if that analogy was too abstract, if you're only looking in one demographic, one way, using one technique and one style, yes, of course you are going to come up with the same set of behaviors, and it will work for what you're looking for. But don't tell me you're looking for marriage and you're serious about marriage and being in a relationship and finding something fulfilling, and you're still doing behaviors chasing women who behave in a certain way. There's like a ridiculous idea, a guy's got to sleep with like 50 women before he knows the wife he wants to be with. I'm like, bro, how do you expect to find, like, nothing about your behavior? Like, of course you're gonna just keep meeting the wrong type of woman if your mentality is, let me sleep with as many women as I can so I can know. But I like, nah, bro, like, you don't need to do that. Now if you want to justify it, want to do it, that's cool, do you, but don't make it like it's this thing you got to do and then complain about the women you meet and then make it seem like all women are like that. Like, no, I mean, look, if that's what you want to eat, I'm not going to eat chicken and complain it tastes like beef, or I'm not going to eat chicken and complain it tastes like chicken. That's foolish. And imagine if I made a channel then, or if I made a bunch of content all about how all chicken tastes like chicken, but I call chicken beef, or I say all meat tastes like chicken. That'd be ridiculous, and that's what's happening.
That's right. And one of the conversations I had with Connor Beaton from Man Talks, and he would definitely be an interesting show for you to go on if I can make that connection. He was talking about, we want to aim for mature masculinity. And one of the problems with the likes of a Fresh and Fit is that they encourage mastery of body and finances, which is great, and discipline within those areas. But then you must have no discipline whatsoever with your dick. You can fuck anything you want. You can do whatever you want. And it's the complete opposite of what we should be encouraging. And for me, as a young guy being impressionable, you see the likes of a Tate perhaps. And again, I think Andrew Tate has some big positives and of course some negatives too. There's times where you're like, absolutely, get your money in order, get your body in order, get your mind in order. But having discipline in those areas doesn't mean that you just suddenly run free and are incredibly promiscuous and treat women like shit, because how can you expect them to behave well towards you?
And on top of that, like that's such an important area of life, like our ability to relate with the opposite sex. Like that's like again, that's how the species propagates. But on that idea of like some good ideas, some bad ideas, whenever I hear that as a justification or a defense for somebody, um, or rather as a use or as a way to excuse the bad points, I think about something I read in this book called A Cure for Hate. Cure for Hate is written by Peter Mac Tony McAleer, not Peter, Tony McAleer, and the book is about he was a white supremacist growing up. He was like in the whole neo-Nazi gang, and then he reformed and now devotes his life to like keeping getting people out of that life and breaking down a lot of the misinformation around this. But he talks about how extreme ideas become mainstream. And he says, you take an idea, he says, we'll call it a fringe idea, which is something like, well, less than 1% of the population believes. And to make that, first to make it take something fringe, you got to make it extreme. An extreme position, he says, is something like 10% of the population believes, or 5 to 10%. Now, once you get it to that point, now what you have, you likely have somebody who's able to take that idea, dress it up in fancy language or acceptable language, and then that's how we move it into the mainstream. And he said that's how groups with small amounts of political power are able to influence the larger culture. Okay, so what we have to be careful about, we watch this on the other side with the transgender idea, because look, I again, but as I say this, I don't care what you do. Don't come after me. Don't come after my son. All right, that's my stance on it. When you do that, then I have to, which is why I got to care about this stuff now, because I got to think about it. But one of the things we watch, the two ideas that are not controversial at all when you're thinking is that men and women are different and should not be competing in the same sport in any way, shape, or form. And kids don't have the ability to make long-term decisions because they don't have the prefrontal cortex completely developed yet. They're just young. They're kids. That's why we don't let them do things like vote or drink or get tattoos. The permanent, these permanent things. Those are two things. That wasn't controversial even 5 years ago to say, but they took an extreme idea, a fringe idea, kind of, and they said, how can we dress this up as an extreme idea? First, all right, which is trans people should have all rights the same. I agree. Do whatever you want as long as it doesn't. There are some things you can't do. I was explaining this, but in general. And those things for people who hear this and think I might just be like word salad. I think the trans rights should be extended to all people, or rather, all rights should be extended to anyone with who's transgender. Notable exceptions are anywhere where gender is a specific requirement for entry to a space or an event. That sums it up. So we're talking about everything positive, like a sorority dorm or something, or an all girls college. To something negative like prison housing. Okay. And there are tons of stories about how bad that gets with with transgenders in prison. Okay. So we have all that. So that once the idea takes that extreme form, then we dress it up in fancy language and it becomes mainstream. We had that bathroom debate here in the United States. And people were like, in Europe, they don't even have like the bottom floor. You can't even see people, which is true. But now we've got this now it's moving a little closer to mainstream that everything should be permissible within reason, I think, but nobody thinks in reason because any hint of reason, you start to look like a bigot. When you start saying, oh, no, we shouldn't transition children, that shouldn't be a crazy idea, right? When you start saying that, like, we shouldn't worry about them and everyone should be able to compete in sports regardless of their biological sex, even though we know the differences. Now we've taken this crazy idea and we've got it mainstream to the point where like it's a debate, like and that's maybe not completely accepted, but the point that it's even being debated means that it's approaching that level of acceptability. Now there's pushback, of course, is there tends to be on all men ideas that move from that fringe to the mainstream. So all that said, that example, then we can look at, you know, if there's an extreme idea, like, and I think it is an extreme one, you should sleep with as many women as possible. So, or like, high value, the other one, high value men don't cheat, they exercise options. I can't believe how many times I heard that stupid
That's just
idea.
nonsense, isn't it?
Right. But if you get somebody with a bunch of other stuff going on and they promote it, then you keep platforming them. Not part of it is because the outrageous takes get views, but the other part is like, yes, here's this good thing I agree with. It would be like, you know who Richard Spencer is? Richard
I
Spencer,
do.
the
Yeah.
okay, it'd be like Rogan having Spencer, and he might, I don't know, but like you give Richard Spencer this big platform because he got jacked and he takes people's money and tells you family. But in the background, Spencer's also talking about we need to send all the blacks back to Africa. Well, you can't have one without the other, and that's the danger. And people don't
True.
realize that. Whenever you platform somebody, because or somebody said to me, or I like to say, everything you touch touches you. And along with that, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Or rather, you do throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you also keep it as well. So that idea bothers people when I say that just because there's a good idea that someone has, we should we
We
should
should
not
accept
ignore
everything
the.
else they say. Yeah.
No, we have to be, because that's how every single uh
Extreme
dictatorship
idea makes its way in.
gain power. But like, people don't realize there's like no history of someone just seizing government and taking it uh because they are a dictator like that. They're like, no, get out of here. Like, no, they were elected and put in power
They had
first.
popular support for a period for some
Yeah,
of their ideas. You're absolutely right.
that's this is the type of thinking. It takes a lot of energy. I won't lie. Like part of this, I just realized while I was talking through it because we're thinking and having a discussion. But that's what we have. Look, I'm not that monger that's going to say something crazy like, fortunately, we live in the United States and we have like all these Trump checks and balances. So no matter what president gets in power, it's very difficult for them to overthrow things. So I don't want people to hear this and think I'm like making a side comment about Trump, which is like how someone took a comment I made about this book. I think it was like Goodbye Berlin or something like that. I don't want people to think that. What I'm talking about is a general idea about how extreme ideas that a lot of people don't think are good, or a lot of people disagree with even within the ranks, how they attain more power is because they attach themselves to a person or another idea that is good and that is accepted, and you keep kind of bringing it along, and by co-signing their good idea, you might
You
say you
validate the others.
disagree with
Yeah.
it, but you do validate them because it's strong enough to bring along with them.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, Ed? And one of the things I was once saying the time we've got left together is what I find so encouraging about the likes of your messaging is you've come from this unstable, challenging background, and now you advocate for a traditional, positive background that raises a family well, that gives your child the best support system. You're encouraging men to get into sport, to sort out their money, to sort out their mindset, but without all the red pill nonsense that sits alongside that. So I think we are seeing more creators that have that more traditional, like, based values that we really need in society for young men.
Yeah, and the real kind of point here is that you have to raise your level of what you find acceptable, or rather, yeah, we'll say that you have to raise your level, and that requires discipline and discernment. I can't, in good conscience, this is why having kids is so great. Because at the very least, if you care one bit and you do a little bit of research, you go, okay, my kid is going to end up modeling me. So that makes you model a better person. You take that to a level higher and you realize that you got to become the change you want to see in the world, right?
Mm.
I'm not joking, I guess. I'm very serious. I say, I could be 10 times as big if I just picked a sod, right? and constantly ambassador the other side. But sometimes people have good points on one side and sometimes they don't. And I refuse to co-sign something in any way, shape, or form because it's my side, it's my people. There's guys I agree with generally. It's like, no, that's a bad fucking idea. It's a bad,
Yeah,
or that's not conducive to us becoming better. And if you want to hold on to that, that's cool. I'm not going to co-sign it. Now, if you want to take it some kind of way, like I'm not co-signing you, okay. I suppose in the purest sense of the word, yeah, that doesn't mean we have a problem, but that means I'm aware enough of my environment and how I'm perceived and the reach I've been blessed to have that if I platform a bad idea in any way, at least one that I don't
yep.
that I know is bad. You know, it's one thing I make a mistake, I come out and own that. But if I know it's not good, no, I can't support that.
It's a
Hey,
masculine trait to be disagreeable, and your ability to be disagreeable with ideas that you don't want to get fully behind is a very important skill to have, and to not just be swept along by something.
yeah, like you have to stand for something and you have to think. And look, to younger guys, you know, back to like one of the reasons why I really have taken a completely different stance on the red pill now is because I realized, you know, when you're young, you're impressionable. There's just no way around it. You know, every dude. How old are you? You look young. I don't know.
I'm older than I look, Ed. I'm 32.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, you are older than you look. But okay, but you're closer in proximity to the age range I'm going to give. We'll say like 23 to 28.
Yep.
You know, for half of that age range, your brain's not even finished developing. But you got to realize something. That is an impressionable age, and we don't like to think about that because it's like you should be an adult, and you are like you are an adult. You know, society's going to treat you like one. You're adult enough is how I like to put it. Okay, but that doesn't mean you're not going to absorb messaging, and you're not going to look to people who look like you, whether that is or look like what you want to become,
Yeah.
and absorb how they're living. I got to be aware of that. I have to think, you know, and maybe that's being full of myself. I don't know, but I got to think that there are some people who are looking at me, and I have to evaluate and look at my responsibility. Having an audience is a responsibility. And the worst part about it is it's a rare type, not rare. It's one of those things you don't really earn. At least people don't think of that. So, because when you earn something, you tend to be a little more protective of it. I'm aware of the gift that an audience is, and I think of it as something I've earned. So that means I got to be responsible in what I put out and what I say and what I do. Okay, that doesn't mean you know, I make crackhead jokes online a lot, but they're jokes, and I'm not. Every now and then I got to come out and be like, look, man, I'm not telling anyone to smoke crack. You understand that this is humor, but stuff about anything about race or gender that I don't that is only being used divisively. Like you can speak on a fact, like absolutely speak on facts. I encourage that all the time. But you know, but don't go making facts up. Like for example, there's a stat that's floating around out there about how 70% of women initiate or like 70% of divorces or something like that are initiated by women. When I hear that as a thinker, as somebody who actually is has like who who studied physics, and not that this is a physics problem, but it's what physics trains you to like evaluate data and work mathematically. My first thought when I hear that is, do we keep track of divorces by who initiated them? That's my first thought. My next thought after that is, are we keeping track of, or is it even possible to measure the status of the relationship? Because look, if I cheat on my girl and then she files the divorce, is that the same thing? No, no, it's not. And then you go and look at the study, which is what you should do whenever big claims. When you go look at where that stat comes from, it's from self-reported data, which means it's they're not asking like what led up to the cause, and it's not even really asking like what did both people agree to quit? Somebody had to no. So you got to be careful with this stuff because it's just good enough. There's just enough kernel of truth or agreeability that it catches like wildfire. It's like I had an argument with people online because I made this video about single mom, and I said, though, I just got to be clear, these are my experiences, and I'm also attacking a dad because everyone goes, oh, she took my kids and my family. Look, when you look at the stats on this, you look at the numbers as you should, instead of just hearing it and not thinking, you realize most divorces don't even make it to arbitrate. Like they don't make it to a judgment. I'm not divorces, custody disputes.
Yep.
Over 50%, I mean, slightly, it's like 51%. They're like, oh, it's better for you to go with the mom. So guys are signing off. And then there's like the arbitration level where they decide there too. Only 4% end up going to a judge. Okay. And of those 4%, when a guy fights, it's awarded custody about 70% of the time. So where this idea comes from is crazy. You know where it comes from? It comes from, there's that selection bias of your experiences. Some guy who, he don't want to come out and say it because he can't say that. But if you fight for your kids, if you fight for your kids and you're a responsible human, meaning you got a job, bringing income, and you don't have any previous
then
convictions,
you actually have a chance. Yeah.
You typically get at least 50-50 custody, unless you want the whole thing. But these guys ain't trying to say that. And so it's the logical inadequacies like that, they bug the shit out of me. It's why I can't be left or right. But like I made a statement one day. I made 3 statements. I remember 2 clearly. Maybe I'll remember the third as I come through. My first statement was like, I'm pro Second Amendment, but I think with something as powerful as a firearm that anybody can squeeze the trigger into life, we should have mandatory training. Second Amendment enthusiasts lost their mind. This is a good idea. This is something that most of them preach. Like, you should train with your weapon. Craziness. The second thing I said, calling pro-life the opposite of or calling pro-choice the opposite of pro-life was really a brilliant marketing plan on people who support abortion, because choice is not the opposite of life. Death is. You're in support of that. Oh, they lost their minds. But the other side lost their minds. And I told you I will remember the third one. I couldn't. But I made a post about it.
Ed, and that's the key, isn't it? And that's why I value your content. That's why I value your mindset. And that's why I value conversations like this, because we can have over an hour conversation about all these different variations and thoughts in our head. Well, of course, intertwined with some lessons for people to take home too.
Yeah, for sure. So at the end of the day, look, if you want to guess how I think on something, present me with it. Look at the data first. Any study, you make sure you looked at it, because I'm gonna look. If you manage to get my attention, because now the gift and the curse of nuanced thinking is that nuanced thinking takes energy, and you're less likely to be fooled. But it takes energy. If I don't have to have an opinion on it, I'm not going to.
We don't want to use the bandwidth for it. You've got too much on
but if it is important, and there were some things that became important when I became a father. Okay, so now I got to know these things. I got to look and see what the lay of the land is. I got to look. Are they actually making schools teach sex ed to fifth graders, 5-year-olds? So I have to know this now. I can't just and I'll look if it is what people say it is, then I'll say it is. If it's not, it's not. But at the end of the day, that's what I want everyone to do. But they won't do that because that takes a lot of energy, a lot of energy.
Agreed.
But they show for things that are important to them.
Agreed. Ed, let's bring this one home. I loved reading the book. I'm sure the listeners will as well. Where should they head towards to continue the conversation and get their hands on it?
So to grab the book, it's available everywhere. Amazon, Barnes and Noble has signed copies, as does Books A Million. So if you want to grab a signed copy, and I signed all them things myself. They didn't just copy my signature 750 times. I sat here and took 3 days. Yeah, I signed them. So that's a real signed copy if you go grab one from Barnes and Noble or Books A Million. But outside of Amazon and Books A Million, if you want to listen to it, I've read the audiobook. I've read my own audiobook. I see why they got to pay people to read, because you don't think about it, but when was the last time you read out loud a 300-page, 70,000 word book? Now I see why they got to pay people, even the author. But you can listen to it on Audible as well. So you can get it pretty much anywhere, and I really appreciate the support. I think it's a great, great story.
Beautiful, Ed. I certainly think so too. That'll be linked in the show notes. Thank you to you, Ed. Thank you for coming back on the show. And thank you to you guys, the listeners. I'll be back to speak to you all again